Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the Kevin Michael Grace Show. No, it's the KMG Show. Sorry, I'm a bit rusty. It's been 4 days because I have been moving, or mostly I was waiting to move, which is even worse than moving. It's funny, I spent 12 years in the same apartment in Victoria, which I left in January of 2017. And since that time, I have now lived in 10 different places. But I am in an apartment now, no longer in a hotel. And my stuff is still in storage, which will require some logistical thinking. But it's nice to have one's own bed to sleep in for a change. And, well, the setup here in terms of the show is not ideal because it's a furnished apartment, which is good. But there is this very elaborate double desk system with all of these nooks in it. And there is a nook for a computer monitor, but it is far too small. So my computer monitor is in front of the nook, and my keyboard is right in front of my monitor. And I guess I'm going to have to experiment with the lighting because you see that I'm far brighter on this side than on this side. And the reason for that is that there is open windows to my left. I guess there's a light above me, but I'm waiting for all of the complaints about the lighting and the sound, although I have to say this is not a carpeted room, so the sound should be fairly decent. And of course, well, oh, yes, I can update viewers, listeners on this. I finally got the sound problem with my computer solved. And I may have made a purchase that I didn't need, or two purchases that I didn't need, actually. But it may have been as simple as my USBs were in the wrong port. I know that sounds crazy, but I changed the configuration and the sound works, except that, you always lose something. You always lose things when you move. And as far as I can tell, I only lost one thing in the move from the hotel room, but it was the RCA to RCA cable, which connects the sound card to my speakers. And I had gone without sound for the very longest time. So I went to London Drugs this morning, and I found I had to spend $20 for a cable, which is absolutely preposterous because, you should be able to get these things for about $5. But, I had to know whether it was working. And indeed, it is working, although the cable seems to be a bit wonky. But I managed to get it to work. So what that means is that Theater Thursday is back on. On Thursday, we'll be talking about Fassbinder's The Marriage of Maria Brown, and the book club on Friday, we will be discussing Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle. So it appears that the show is back to normal. Let's see. Yeah, we'll just look at your left side, says YT. There's an overhead lamp over here. I suppose I could move that over here maybe to balance the light from the natural light from outside. We'll try that out. You must obscure the window with degrading cassette tapes. I don't know why people say cassette tapes. There weren't any cassette tapes, actually. It was all Blu-rays, DVDs, and a few CDs. But there we go. Again from Chogokin666. One lone lunatic insists upon banging a can. Is that finally over? Because I went to London Drugs, which is a local or a Western Canadian drugstore plus chain. It sells a whole bunch of different things. It sells, well, pretty much everything except food. Well, actually, they do have dry goods in there. And I went there on Saturday afternoon, and they're still doing that nonsense where you have to stand 2 meters away from each other, waiting to be permitted to enter the store. So degrading. Not very many people wearing masks in Victoria, even though our Prime Minister believes that it is necessary and goes around wearing his own mouth diaper everywhere, even when he was outside. Victoria is quite a windy city, as it sits at the very tip of a peninsula, and it was quite windy indeed on Saturday afternoon, and yet there were a bunch of idiots wearing mouth diapers outside. I don't know what possible benefit they think they get from this, except that I suppose it makes them feel more virtuous and pose as more virtuous to the rest of the world. William Hicks says, no more room service. Juanita and Ortiz are going to miss Kevin and Michael Grace. Adios, amigo, they sang as three mariachis played a Spanish ballad. Well, interestingly enough, one of the reasons why I was not totally wiped out by spending just over 2 months in hotels is because the prices have been reduced significantly for two reasons. Lack of tourists, because the American border is still closed, and because of the COVID-19 panic, there has been no room service at all. They get you new towels and new shampoo and conditioner and that sort of thing, but no room service. And interestingly enough, at the Days Inn Hotel, where I stayed for 6-7 weeks, very nice hotel it was too. You remember the big suite I stayed in there. There were no Juanitas and Ortizes there. Strictly Canadian, strangely enough. David Wright says it's getting worse in Michigan. Masks are required in nearly all stores, so I don't shop much. You have seen the mayor of Minneapolis. I don't know why he hasn't resigned after the excruciating humiliation he has suffered in the last few weeks. Perhaps he's a glutton for punishment, or more likely a glutton for power. That's what we learned from Armando Iannucci's The Thick of It, is that politicians have a pretty much bottomless appreciation for personal humiliation. And when I saw Jacob Fry wearing that black mask that reads, "I can't breathe" on it, it reminds me of a joke, which is supposedly, it actually happened, when Bono of U2, remember them? They used to be a big thing. And then Apple decided to download one of their albums as spam on everyone's devices, and people didn't take that kindly. Anyway, so Bono is at a concert, and he's giving a rousing speech about world poverty, and he said, every word I say, a child in Africa dies. And one wag shouted from the audience, "Well, stop fucking talking then." But whenever I see Jacob Fry wearing that idiotic mouth diaper, I just want someone to yell at him. You can't breathe? Then take off that stupid mask. Chogokin666 says July the 2nd haircut. Interesting choice of date, July the 2nd. That is my 65th birthday. So let's get on the housekeeping show-wise, having been taken care of. Let's get back to the show. The media has become well, totally shameless. I mean, you thought that they had been shameless before, but this is from the New York Post, and should have been on Friday's show, but of course there was no Friday show. This is a story by Jackie Sallow. George Floyd's childhood dream was to become a Supreme Court justice. An essay penned by an 8-year-old George Floyd revealed they had big dreams of one day sitting on the Supreme Court, according to his former teacher, Waynell Sexton, who taught Floyd at Frederick Douglass Elementary School in Texas, uncovered his writing assignment from 1981, in which he described his aspirations of becoming a judge, CNN reported. I don't believe for a second that George Floyd wrote such a thing in 1981. Does this teacher keep the thousands or tens of thousands of such assignments going back decades? I rather doubt that too. But in any event, Floyd, who went by his middle name Perry, answered a prompt for a Black History Month lesson about students' plans to make a difference. When I grow up, I want to be a Supreme Court judge. When people say, Your Honor, he did rob the bank, I will say, be seated. And if he doesn't, I will tell the guard to take him out. Then I will beat my hammer on the desk. Then everybody will be quiet. Actually, that's a pretty good simulacrum of, I don't know, a fairly good student at that age. It's not too good. You know, if the language were too good, then everyone would know it was fake. For instance, then I will beat my hammer on the desk. Well, actually, it's called a gavel. In any event, again, nearly 4 days later, his death has prompted calls for justice after, we all know that story. Okay, I'm just wondering, so Perry Floyd's or George Floyd's, what was his favorite Supreme Court justice? Justice Madison, perhaps? Louis Brandeis? Felix Frankfurter? William O. Douglas? A perennial favorite? No, the media is determined to take this career criminal, this felon who died shortly after the pursuit of fraud and resisting arrest, to make him into a saint. By next year, how many schools in the United States, how many schools and libraries or public squares and the like will be named after George Floyd? Will it be in the tens, in the hundreds, in the thousands, perhaps? We'll just have to wait and see. So let's talk about Seattle. There ain't no party like a Seattle block party. Jenny Durkin, who is the foolish lesbian who is the mayor of Seattle, and as I pointed out before, apparently it's a rule in Seattle now that you must have a homosexual mayor. The mayor before Jenny Durkin, Ed Murray, a longtime gay activist, resigned after some difficulty with persistent accusations of pedophilia on his behalf. How embarrassing. Of course, the media didn't make much of that. According to Real Clear Politics, Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin could not explain how long Seattle residents could expect the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, which I understand may have been renamed in downtown Seattle, to exist, and said it could turn into a summer of love in an interview Thursday night with CNN host Chris Cuomo. For the first time in, 3.5 years, I have watched television. And I discovered that Chris Cuomo is not only on CNN, he hosts a program on the HLN network where he interviews serial killers and luxuriates in violence committed against wives and girlfriends. But let's see the most amusing part of this story. Just a recap, something like 6 square blocks of downtown Seattle was seized by a group of peaceful protesters. And there's been all sorts of amusing stories coming out of this, but the media is not interested in what is clearly one of the very most interesting and fast-moving stories in America. No, they don't really want to. They don't really want to even show much footage, because you remember I told you that the mural is a signifier, and what it signifies is you do not want to live here. Well, all of the Seattle Autonomous Zone, or Chaz, or whatever they're calling it now, it's become an outdoor mural. All of it, the streets, the sides of the buildings, it looks like an alfresco crack house. Let's see. So Mayor Durkin said, "I know it will shock you that the president, Trump, is perhaps not giving an accurate truthful picture of what is happening at Chaz. We've got 4 blocks in Seattle that you just saw pictures of that is more of a block party atmosphere. It's not an armed takeover. It's not a military junta. We will make sure that we can restore this. But we have block parties and the like in this part of Seattle all the time. It's known for that. So I think the president, number one, there is no threat right now to the public. And we're taking that very seriously. We're meeting with businesses and residents. But what the president threatened to send the military in is illegal and unconstitutional. Actually, it isn't, but never mind that. And the fact that he can think he can just tweet that and not have ramifications is just wrong. So my question for Mayor Jenny from the block is it a Seattle custom to bring AR-15 rifles to block parties? If so, I was not aware of that. The police chief of Seattle is a Black woman. So again, I would ask the question of this woman, Carmen Best, that I've asked of the police chief of Minneapolis, who is a Black man. If there's all of these problems, including systemic racism in your police departments, why didn't you do something about it, considering that you are the chief of police? But let's see, yesterday, Police Chief Carmen Best was on Face the Nation. And Margaret Brennan we go now to Seattle, where this week several blocks of one neighborhood was shut down in order for protesters to hold demonstrations against racial injustice and police brutality. The police there vacated the precinct. It's a situation that has drawn considerable criticism from President Trump. So there is, 2 senators talking about which is how you do your job. What do you think of these proposals? Well, I can tell you, I think all the time about how we might improve policing and what we're experiencing in the field every day. I absolutely believe in accountability, except not for herself. But I think we've moved away from using the word reform. We were under a consent decree in the Seattle Police Department for almost a decade. We followed every rule and everything that was asked of us to do, yet here we are. Yes, under Obama, the federal government seized control of a great many police departments around the United States. And again, one might ask questions of Obama's Department of Justice. If you had control of these police departments, why didn't you eliminate this so-called systemic racism? Yes, she's talking about defunding the police, stopping police brutality, no qualified immunity. And I just realized it was a moment, an epiphany, that this is a pivotal moment in history. We're going to move in a different direction. She's asked what she thinks about reducing community. Well, I think that is a conversation for the politicians and the judicial people to have about how that works and what that looks like. I think there are various iterations that have been proposed, and I think that is a better discussion in that arena. Now, I guess there's a question of, yes, so I read reports, Margaret Brennan asks, in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere that there were negotiations underway with Black Lives Matter, who are saying they didn't want to hand over control until funding to the police was cut. You're saying it's actually not that clear of a negotiation. Yeah, those are great questions, says Chief Bess. I wish I had the answer to how long it might last. I can tell you that we want to move it forward as quickly and efficiently as possible. Now, I guess a difficulty is, as the police chief says, is there seems to be some question about who is in control of Chaz or Saz or whatever it's called. So what does Raz Simone, who has been dubbed the warlord of Chaz, have to say? Well, he's actually been rather quiet on Twitter. He retweeted yesterday Hotep Jesus, who wrote, "Agents of destruction start a fire. Raz Simone and others rush to extinguish the fire. You won't see this on your right-wing media outlets and blue check accounts." 2 days ago, he tweeted, "Quit letting people weaponize your ignorance, fear, stupidity, or jealousy. Any lawyers out there trying to get a bag? I don't know what that means. Quit spreading fake news and rumors. Only speak on what you know for a fact through your personal experience." And an inspirational message from 3 days ago: "Don't lose hope or focus. Remember what we're here for. Black Lives Matter." And there is a picture, I don't know whether it's real or not, of an enormous Black Lives Matter flag flying from that tower in downtown, not downtown Seattle, but near the waterfront. Yes, the tower that went up for the 1962 World's Fair, which I attended. Okay, so Jack Posobiec has been there. He is with OANN. This is from Breitbart. He has done a bunch of filming from broadcasting from the autonomous zone. He streamed live on Periscope for just over 20 minutes as he appeared to be leaving the 6-block region. Oh, yes, this is the new name. Apparently, it's gone from Chaz or Saz to CHOP, Capitol Hill Occupied, Protest. Okay. The Chaz was set up last week after the Seattle Police Department was ordered by local authorities to abandon the eastern precinct. Posobiec walked alongside a colleague as the two described what they had seen over 3 days and nights. The day crew, he said, which was typically shown to the outside world, was completely different from the night crew who inhabited the zone overnight. Posobiec called rapper Raz Simone, who has been described on social media as the zone's unofficial leader, a tin pot warlord, adding, "There is no rule of law whatsoever. It was mob rule and mob justice." Actually, I should have mentioned this earlier. Police Chief Best had been complaining 3 days ago that there was a problem with answering 911 calls from the CHOP. Posobiec said that a member of Raz's crew had assaulted another journalist for filming inside the zone. Also, they tried to set fire to a local auto yard, he reported, noting that someone had broke into the facility. He added that he had spent the entire night with Raz and promised more reporting to come. So Raz is, there's some accused thief, and Raz is ordering the accused thief's bag searched. The police, the zone was being policed, Posobiec said, by Raz and elements of Antifa, both of whom are armed. So the media's completely lying to you when they say there's no armed security. He said there was no de-escalation policy to avoid conflict. The media narrative on this place has been an absolute lie, absolute, utter lie. Posobiec said, filming large piles of trash, "This place needs to be shut down." He added that several people had been transported outside the zone by ambulance due to drug overdoses. "I'm perfectly fine with people wanting to peaceably assemble there, but you've got to have some level of public safety. Something bad is going to happen. It's the mob." They reported no sanitation and no social distancing. Are we still talking about that after marches with tens and hundreds of thousands of people? Seriously? We're still talking about that? I have seen numerous videos from the CHOP, and there seem to be a great number of intoxicated people. I don't know whether this would be any more than one would find on the streets of Capitol Hill on a weekend. And what's the latest from him? T-Mobile's network is down, and it's affecting calls from Verizon and AT&T too. It's always terrible when one hears about telecommunications giants having technical difficulties. Oh, yes, someone wore an OANN shirt, and Oklahoma State's Chuba Hubbard, the nation's leading rusher last year, that he won't be doing anything from Oklahoma. That's a terrible, terrible, terrible shame. If the star college athletes of America withdrew their services because of insufficient respect for Black Lives Matter, I think this would be one of the greatest tragedies in the history of that nation. Yeah, it's just an utter mess there. Businessman whose business was assaulted called the police asking for assistance, and he was told, no, we are not going to give you any. And at Monterey Peninsula College, someone asked, is he still expected to pay his taxes? I wonder why. So there have been numerous people reporting on this on Twitter. I mean, that's where one gets one's news on this, because ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, they are not interested, again, in what is clearly one of the very most interesting and fast-changing stories in the nation. There's a suggestion here that T-Mobile was hit, or they suffered this because they are no longer advertising on Tucker Carlson's show. Is Raz in a sex cult? No one is surprised, says RHGR. Well, there have been accusations about Raz being, shall we say, a sexual entrepreneur. Store owner gets robbed. Now he's being chastised for trying to get his property back. There's no such thing as property, man. Everything is held communally. Yes, it was a car tender auto shop. It was broken into, tried to set the building on fire. Owners detained him, but then a mob of protesters ran down the street and attacked and tore down his fence. Owner says police and fire department have done nothing. Looks like security as well is going well in Chop Neil Whitey, so we can tell you you're the problem. And you, yeah, and there he goes, down on his knees. And you, Mr. Shop owner, you didn't let the thief go fast enough. It has taken them 1 week to build the most racist society in history. This is the Conflict Resolution Advisory Council. Now, I understand that there have been, as typical with anarchist gatherings, it takes a long time to get to any kind of consensus. We will form a unique system called the Conflict Resolution Advisory Council. We will hold a community democratic vote to appoint 3 people to the council. To eliminate prejudice, we elect 1 black man, 1 black woman, and 1 white woman. Each person should undergo at least one 45-minute sensitivity and political training session, which we can help organize. Whenever there is an internal conflict in the zone, it will be put to the council. Both people, or Soviet, I suppose would be a better word, both people have an opportunity to present their side of view of the story to the council to review. The council members will decide on a fair resolution and provide it as advice. Initially, the council will be advisory only. In the future, the system could evolve to become more mature with binding resolutions, impositions, I don't know what they mean by that, retribution, enforcement, and imprisonment. Edit 1. After receiving feedback about inclusiveness, we shall include in the council 1 black man, 1 black woman, 1 trans black person, 1 non-binary black person, and 1 white woman, and the white woman has been edited out. So no white people. Edit 2. On more feedback, we will add to the council 1 Asian non-male, 1 Native American non-male, and 1 Latinx non-male, and then 4 additional black men and women to balance it out. In total, there are 3 plus 4 plus 4 equals 11 members. Edit 3. We've received some feedback about including disabled persons, mental and physical, and homeless persons on the council. 20 or 40% of the council should be persons with lived experience of disability. At least 10% should be experiencing involuntary homelessness. And, what about the alphabet people? An additional seat for another non-white or mixed race child between the ages of 8 and 15, preferably disabled. Edit 7. We've heard your concerns about the Asian non-male seat representing all Asian subgroups as if they are a monolithic identity. That wasn't our intention. We will replace the Asian non-male seat with 12 mini seats for each of the following Asian non-male identities: Chinese, Filipino, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, Cambodian, Taiwanese, Malaysian, Mongolian, Okinawan, Singaporean, and wildcard. Any Asian identity except Korean American. Why not? Don't they like Koreans? Yeah, it's the war of all against all. I have been predicting for years that intersectionality will lead to this, and there's a meme going around. The Virgin Seattle Autonomous Zone, 2 days old, ran out of food in 2 days. Canceled for sexual harassment after a day. Plastic barricades and cardboard signs, tourist trap. Not recognized by any entity as a sovereign state, completely surrounded by the United States of America. As opposed to the Chad Principality of Sealand, which you can look up. It is a real thing, and Adam Curtis, I think on his blog, he has a report that he did on Sealand and the disputes over it, has lasted for 50 years, visited by a German diplomat. Britain admitted it had no legal jurisdiction when a gunfight broke out, retook their territory by force using mercenaries and a cache of weapons, raises money by selling cool royal titles to foreigners, a literal fortress floating on the high seas. And again, it is a real thing. Yes. How is the thugocracy going? And yeah, it's lawless. But maybe the summer of love is lawless. The whole story, 6, has also been reporting. A local business owner, presumably that's the car trader, and they have video, burglarized last night in the CHOP and denied emergency city services when confronted by an angry crowd. 4 hours ago in Capitol Hill, this is, there's video here of Raz Simone handing out firearms to unknown individuals who stated they were 18 years old. One protester stated there was a bad energy, a threat, and they were exercising their rights. Okay. Someone called LD Timmy has also been reporting from the shop. Yeah, there is a lot. It would be good if there was some sort of media organization that could put all of this information to get from various sources together, sort of sift through it, organize it. I don't know. What would you might call them? Newspapers, television stations, something like that. Raz Simone said he wants the Seattle police to be like an Uber app. I don't know. I don't know what that means, but I guess we're going to find out. A site called Post-Hardcore Tucker Carlson, and the avatar is a picture of Lou Reed, circa Metal Machine Music, has contributed an enormous number of pictures from the CHOP. And this is my favorite. This is written on, I don't know, a trash bin, perhaps? It says, white gays are indebted to black queers and black trans people, and then there are flowers and a heart in the middle. Now, we know that every significant invention and technological development in the history of mankind is the result of the exertions of Black people. But now we find out that they also invented homosexuality. How about that? There is just no end to their ingenuity. Let's go over to the chat, the chat briefly. Metal Mike says maybe a new music genre will emerge again out of Seattle, hip chop. DB Cooper says doesn't really matter to us. Those businesses have obscene profit margins. I'm not opposed to them getting taxed heavily. Presumably not the local car trader guy, I guess. A girl says, yeah, literally the thought police. Metal Mike, give the cop a bad rating. Yes. Don from Beyond says, I'm shocked at the action of the Supreme Court today, alphabet people. Well, I guess we learned one thing from the Supreme Court ruling, that there could be no discrimination by employers against alphabet people, which is that freedom of association, well, the final nail has been driven in that coffin. Now, I haven't seen the ruling. If it applies to religious institutions, such as hospitals and the like, then clearly they have put the final nail in the coffin of religious freedom in America. DB Cooper says, I thought about making an app that routes you around vibrant neighborhoods. There was an app? Was it something to do with Microsoft a year or two ago that had the unintentional effect of telling people, to best stay out of vibrant zones? And I believe this was squashed because people were so upset. Well, the usual suspects. Tom Anderson says, still think Trump has a good chance for re-election in the fall? Yes, indeed, I do. He's giving a statement on the police or announcing an executive order tomorrow that people are already freaking out about. I just want people to keep in mind that before the riots in Ferguson and Baltimore, there was a great deal of unease expressed amongst white Americans about the activities and tactics of American police. I mean, it's different in different places, of course, but, for decades, we've all read about no-knock raids based on information given by prison stoolies, wholly made up, where people are terrorized and their dogs are shot to death for barking, or people are shot to death for nothing. And the militarization of the police is exceedingly distressing. Part of the militarization of the police is due to scale and the collapse of community. And part of it is due, I suppose, to the idea, I mentioned this last week, coming from Joseph Wambaugh's novel, of which a movie was made, that the police are the new centurions. But when I see policemen wearing combat armor, it does not induce friendly feelings in me. Police officers were supposed to, keep the peace, but that idea was thrown out the window rather a long time ago. Octopus Knight says they don't like Koreans because of the roof Koreans. Michael Mavis says Korea man bad. Yeah. This is beyond parody. No, nothing is beyond parody these days. Super Predator says Pelosi presented a folded flag to George Floyd's family as if he was some kind of fallen soldier. Well, you might remember back at the 2016 Democratic Convention, Hillary Clinton had a session where she met with the mothers of the movement, including the mothers of the Gentle Giant and Trayvon Martin's mother, the Gentle Giant being Michael Brown, the finest that Black America has to offer. Apparently, I mean, why else would they get such a tribute from no less than Hillary Clinton? And I'm sure their mothers, as well as their fathers, are very, very proud of them. Doubtless, they're quite pleased about the enormous settlements they always get in these cases. So, what is up next? More about the CHOP. This is a piece from John Binder in Breitbart. It has a quasi-border patrol to control its perimeters and seemingly conducts deportations without due process. Organizers said the armed guards have their weapons concealed and are there to defend CHOP's borders. MyNorthwest.com reported. Organizers confirmed there are some armed guards at the Chaz entrances. The weapons are not visible. It's not our intent to create any paradox, to try to incite violence or have that be a motif, said demonstrator Morris Cola. We're not trying to use our guns to flash around. It's for defense. He said that the people are welcome to come and go freely without being stopped. The guns are only to guard against violent white supremacist groups. Like its border controls, Chaz is surrounded by a border wall via vehicle barriers as well as random fencing. Opposite the United States deportation policy, though, occupants of CHOP can be seemingly removed by a mob without any due process. Last week, a man said he was deported from Chaz for being pro-life. The man was chased out of the autonomous zone by a mob taunting him. I don't know why he would mention that to anyone there. They're attempting to grow things in the autonomous zone, and I've seen some of their efforts involving cardboard and earth scattered on top of it. It is most amusing. It appears that they do not know what they are doing. It's a controversy over whether this dude should have jumped over the fence blocking off the police precinct to tag the boarded up walls. He was ultimately allowed to tag it despite concerns. As I say, this area is come to represent an open air crack house. It is just, if you just look at the pictures or watch the videos, it is exceedingly oppressive because there seems to be hardly a square foot which is not covered with lurid spray paint. An angry protester demanded we not record fighting incidents, said if it got out into the internet, it might give Chaz a bad name. Jack Posobiec reports someone saying, we came here to express our religious views about the Lord Jesus Christ. They put me in a choke hold. I don't know whether that's such a good idea. I mean, we have been given the injunction to spread the gospel to all the nations. Probably best to regard these people as Gadarene swine. Another piece from Breitbart from Chris Tomlinson today. Antifa's newly created Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle is straight from the playbook of their European counterparts who've established anti-police no-go squatter areas in European cities for decades. The tactic of declaring an area autonomous and outside of police and government authority is relatively new to the American hard left, but it has a deep history among Antifa extremists in Europe and has led to pitched battles and scenes of massive violence when police have tried to enforce government authority in Antifa strongholds. While the original Antifa movement was a paramilitary wing of the German Communist Party in the 1930s, the current Antifa began in the autonomous scene of West Germany in the 1980s and went hand in hand with anarchists occupying various buildings, many of which remain occupied with national laws unenforced to this day. The far left Jacobin magazine described West German Antifa as an, quote, autonomous movement still numbering in the tens of thousands of active members and capable of occupying entire city blocks in some West German metropoles. Some argue that with the arrival of European-style neo-fascist movements on American shores, it is also time to import European Antifa tactics in response. Yes, show me the man and I will show you the crime. If Antifa is there, then it must mean, by definition, as they see it, that there is a fascist threat. There are several Antifa no-go zones in Germany, but the most well-known are the Rote Flora in Hamburg, a former theater occupied by Antifa since 1989, and the Riga 94, an apartment complex in Berlin's Friedrichshain district that has been occupied since 1990. There was quite a good piece on RT by Guy Burchell, described as British journalist covering current affairs, politics, and free speech issues, recently published in The Sun and spiked online. Mostly peaceful protests, mainstream media have given up any shred of objectivity over Black Lives Matter violence. How thick do they think we are? Well, I'll say off the top, I don't know that it's a question of how thick we are. The question is, what can we do about it? Fox broadcast the George Floyd funeral live. I mean, they have taken the knee. I suppose there's OANN. I guess that's left. This fellow writes, and again, his name is Guy Burchell. You may have noticed the word peaceful being bandied about on your TV screens and appearing in headlines all over the internet a lot recently. Peaceful is an interesting adjective because in most cases, if something is peaceful, it is self-evident. For example, you'd only have to look at a photograph of a yoga retreat or a calm lake on a warm summer's day, and your brain would instantly think peaceful. Likewise, with its opposite, violent, normally if something is violent, it is perfectly obvious. Baying mobs, cage fighting, Quentin Tarantino movies, they're violent, and you don't need to be told they are. Which is why it is rather interesting that peaceful has crept into the headlines of countless stories about the recent protests following the tragic death of George Floyd. Virtually every news outlet, even the Daily Mail, has insisted that all the demonstrations in his name have been mainly placid, well-mannered affairs. They seem to have forgotten, however, that the cameras are rolling. The first widely memed incident of this sort of coverage was footage from MSNBC. This showed reporter Ali Velshi standing outside a building in Minneapolis that was literally on fire as looting took place all around him, insisting that what was going on was mostly a protest and was not, generally speaking, unruly. Next, a CNN revealed to us that Target was temporarily closing some of its stores and adjusting opening hours amid protests. What this headline neglected to mention was that a branch of Target in Minneapolis was one of the first to get looted in the city during the peaceful protests. Ali Velshi, he's a former Canadian. How about that? And as I always like to say, Stalin was wrong. Jews aren't the real rootless cosmopolites. Canadians are. Burchell writes, these protests eventually spread to the UK because Orange Man bad or Tories racist, perhaps both. They began in Hyde Park last week, where thousands gathered in flagrant disregard of social distancing to complain about a crime that happened 4,000 miles away. Eventually, a crowd gathered outside Downing Street and began hurling projectiles at the British police officers guarding the Prime Minister's home while chanting, Boris is a pussy hole. This resulted in 13 arrests after a scuffle broke out between police and some of the protesters. Sky News were running a live blog on the event and did report this scuffle, but added, quote, it should be noted that all of those present say the huge majority of the protests passed peacefully. Well, that's all right then. Yes, peaceful, 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 peaceful. And these protests also resulted in a female mounted police officer being left with serious injuries, including a broken collarbone and collapsed lung after protesters threw firecrackers at her horse, causing it to bolt and smash her into a traffic light. The crowd's reaction, it was to cheer. The Daily Telegraph, which was mocked, may still be by private eye for decades as the Tory graph, said the shocking incidents occurred, quote, following the largely peaceful Black Lives Matter protests, unquote. BBC said that, quote, 27 police officers injured at largely peaceful anti-racism protest, unquote. I would say when 27 police officers are killed at any event, that this is a textbook definition of a riot. And Burchell says, it seems safe to say that if 27 police officers were injured at an FA Cup final, it wouldn't be regarded as a mostly peaceful football match. Yes, he concludes, we get it. You either completely approve of these actions or are so petrified of being branded racist for pointing out that the movement has been infiltrated by revolutionary Marxist thugs that you have decided not to do your jobs properly. Whichever of these two options is the case, just admit it and stop insulting our intelligence by pretending to be impartial. Violence is never peaceful, regardless of what Big Brother might say. Yes, don't get the black women angry. Now, we're going to be talking about people of whom I barely know because I don't watch reality shows because I'm not a child, I'm not a woman, and I'm not a homosexual. But apparently there are a great many people who are au courant with reality TV. We learned from the Mail that Dee Nguyen checks into mental health awareness spa resort after she was fired from MTV's The Challenge for offensive comments. The reality star is seeking help with her mental health after her firing. You know, this suggests that we're almost at the Soviet stage where anyone who disagrees with the party line will be judged to be insane and hospitalized in a lunatic asylum. Her rep says she is focusing on getting better for her well-being after sharing offensive comments on BLM. She apologized Sunday, saying, "I'm sorry for the insensitive tweet I posted." MTV said, as a result of Dee Nguyen's offensive comments on the Black Lives Matter movement, we have severed ties with her. So what was it that she said or did that was so offensive? Well, according to the Mail, the 27-year-old reality star received massive backlash for tweeting, "I don't know why some of you think I'm anti-BLM. I've been saying that since the day I lost my virginity." So she's made a joke about having sex with a black man. Isn't that terribly inclusive? And I guess the death blow was this. Her inability to properly participate in Blackout Tuesday sparked an argument with her black castmates Bailey Dayton, and Bailey, of course, is spelled Bayleigh. It's classier that way. Bailey Dayton and her husband, Swaggy C, who accused Nguyen of posting about the movement for clout. Oh dear. Oh dear. So who's next? Lisette Anthony. I do know who this woman is because she was the dark-haired cutie who appeared in numerous Bryan Adams videos in the 1980s. Hollyoaks, Lisette Anthony quits Twitter after being called actual trash by Rachel Edgy amid show's racism row. Rachel Edgy, 28, slammed Lisette on Twitter after former co-star Charlie Clapham shared a WhatsApp exchange. Oh, I see. So white people are getting other white people fired in order to what? Save their own skin? Again, sounds very Stalinist. The messages appear to show Lisette branding cast members traitors for supporting Rachel after she accused Hollyoaks of behind-the-scenes racism. Lisette has played Marnie Nightingale on Hollyoaks since 2016, while Charlie played Freddie Roscoe from 2013 to 2017. Rachel announced she'd quit Hollyoaks after 4 years playing Lisa Loveday, with her exit scenes set to air later this year. She slammed the show's response to the recent furor over the Black Lives Matter movement earlier this week. Hollyoaks bosses responded in a statement revealing a step-by-step plan to stamp out discrimination. So as far as I can see it, Lisette Anthony was upset by comments made by this Nigerian Briton. I believe it's a Nigerian name. She appeared to claim stars who supported Rachel were traitors before adding, "Sorry, but we're not going to have a job to come back if this stuff keeps being disseminated." And yes, So Hollyoaks is a racist, deeply racist, one might say systemically racist show, and a lot of these shows are getting canceled. Live PD, which was the highest rated cable show in America, was canceled late last week because I guess it has cops in it, and boo! And I guess it showed a lot of black people getting arrested. Rachel has accused the show of behind-the-scenes racism after criticizing the response to the recent furor over the Black Lives Matter movement, leading soap bosses to apologize. In the messages, Lisette said, well, to be fair, they both have that embittered traitor vibe going on. And there's a picture of Rachel here. And I guess, I don't know whether, I didn't know this was a thing. You might remember the joke from Seinfeld where Jay Peterman came up with a top or blouse for women, which was simply a bra. Well, that is what she is wearing in this picture from the Mail. Charlie Clapham, who is clearly one of the worst people in Britain, wrote, Dear Shay Lisette, if supporting a former castmate whilst she speaks of being racially discriminated against makes me a traitor, then so be it. As for embittered, you're currently finished where I started out. Salty? Much? Best, Charlie Clapham. And Rachel posted a GIF of trash being put in a bin by a black man. And it says, Chez Lisette, you are actual trash. Charlie, you are a king and a true ally. Love you, my bro. And we have another story in this regard. Jessica Mulrooney's parents take her kids out to walk their dog as she stays holed up at Toronto home after losing TV jobs and being cut off by BFF Meghan Markle amid racism storm. So we see that Jessica Mulrooney has been markled. Now, this could be quite difficult for Jessica Mulrooney because it is rumored everywhere that all of the negative pro Meghan Mertz stuff and anti her rival in the royal family that has appeared in, say, the Tatler and other places has come from Jessica Mulrooney, supposedly BFF. So Mulrooney, 40, who is a stylist, was fired from Good Morning America and had her Netflix show pulled by CTV earlier this week. CTV is a major Canadian network. DailyMail.com also exclusively revealed how Mulrooney's best friend, Meghan Mertz, was said to have been left so mortified she has severed ties with her. So, yes, apparently she sent threatening messages to a black social media influencer after a white privilege row. And, by the way, Jessica Mulrooney is the daughter-in-law of Brian Mulrooney, longtime Prime Minister of Canada, and she is married to Ben Mulrooney, who is the eerily robotic host of various Canadian reality shows and how would I say celebrity gossip shows. Let's see. The turmoil began on Wednesday when Sasha Exeter, a lifestyle blogger, revealed that weeks ago Mulrooney took offense to a generic call to action she made asking white influencers to use their platforms to address racial inequality. The influencer claims the exchange resulted in Mulrooney saying, quote, I have also spoken to companies and people about the way you have treated me unfairly. You think your voice matters. Well, it only matters if you express it with kindness and without shaming people who are simply trying to learn. Good luck, unquote. Exeter claimed that Mulrooney then threatened her with a lawsuit after she publicly revealed that they'd been embroiled in a private war of words over racism. When Exeter went public, Mulrooney posted a comment on her Instagram page for others to see in which she apologized. In a comment posted on the video clip, Mulrooney said she was unequivocally sorry, added that being Meghan Mertz's closest friend has deeply educated her about race, as if there aren't any black people in Toronto or Montreal. As I told you privately, I've lived a very public and personal experience with my closest friend where race was front and center. It was deeply educational. Really? That just sounds exhausting. My closest friend. What are we going to talk about, Megan Mertz? How about blackety black, 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 black? We talked about that yesterday and the day before. We're going to talk about it every day until the end of time. So don't make the black women angry or they will get you fired. They will ruin your life. Now, of course, these are all just claims. They're all just claims. But I'm not saying that because black women are making these claims. In the absence of supporting evidence, any statement made by anyone is simply a claim. But there are certain people apparently who must be believed at all costs. Never mind that people associated with the entertainment industry are famously paranoid, bitchy people with low self-esteem, and they like to pursue grudges, but just leave all that behind. Don't think about that. Oh, what's the latest in statues being dethroned? A statue of Thomas Jefferson, America's third president and author of the Declaration of Independence, was defaced and torn down on Sunday evening outside a high school in Portland, Oregon. Photos obtained by Oregon Live show the base of the monument was spray painted in black with slave owner and George Floyd. And the number's 846. I have no possible understanding what that might be. At about 7:15 p.m., a crowd of more than 1,000 left the high school grounds. Wait a minute. What day did this happen on? Sunday evening. There's no school on Sunday, and there's no school in Oregon. Golly, this sounds what lawyers call a conspiracy. A crowd of more than 1,000 left the high school grounds to march to the park. By the time they returned, a statue of Thomas Jefferson had been pulled from its pedestal, apparently by a smaller group. I suppose the bigger group was peaceful. The statue fell on its side, and a dent was visible in the concrete where it fell. Earlier in the day, the statue's pedestal had been defaced with graffiti that, among other things, identified Jefferson as a slave owner. I wonder if any of these children know who Thomas Jefferson was. Apparently, a leading BLM activist in Britain was revealed within the last day or two to not know who Winston Churchill was. But why should they care? Britain began the day that they arrived, or their parents arrived. Everything before that is boring and white and not important. From CNN 2 days ago, activists in Richmond, Virginia projected the image of a pride flag and BLM on a Confederate statue there in support of Black alphabet people rights. The statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee has been the site of many protests since the death of George Floyd, and it is the same one currently in legal limbo after the governor's order to remove it was met with a lawsuit. Someone called Erva Drone said before and after the Robert E. Lee statue in Richmond, Virginia, protesters making their voices heard. The grass turning yellow is a testament to all the people marching to end police brutality in recent weeks. Now, I don't need to remind you that these very same people who are out there in the streets protesting in the masses peacefully are the same people who were screaming at you just a couple of weeks ago to get back into your house and not infect everyone. Okay. Oh, Field Marshal Montgomery is in the news. This is from Breitbart again. English Heritage will review all 950 of the blue plaques it maintains across London for problematic connotations. The body maintains London's blue plaques on the exterior of buildings. Again, sorry, this isn't me screwing up. This is a sentence which crashes to a halt. But there are blue plaques on the side of buildings where famous people lived. English Heritage told the Times, while it has no current intention to remove plaques belonging to those deemed racist or having connections to the slave trade, it will be adding contextualizing digital content online, likely detailing the historical figures' sins A spokesman for the charity told the paper that it has no plans at present to provide additional information at the plaques themselves. Why don't they just pull them down? This is absolutely revolting. I was reading recently that the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, when they get to Karl Böhm, the great conductor and friend of Richard Strauss, it's blah, 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 blah. He did this. He didn't protest, etc. All of that thing. Strangely enough, when they're dealing with various Soviet composers, they don't get that same kind of treatment. The newspaper of record speculates that one blue plaque, which could be subject to digital contextualizing, is that of Field Marshal Montgomery, who defeated the Nazis at El Alamein because of his pro-colonial rhetoric. Author Daniel Defoe, who held shares in the slave-trading Royal African Company, could also be branded with the digital scarlet letter. Another British heritage charity, the National Trust, which had forced its frontline volunteers to wear rainbow alphabet people lanyards during Gay Pride Month, and had hidden art depicting men, has also announced that it would be highlighting the slavery connections of the estates it manages. I guess that blue plaque for David Bowie is going to have to come down, given the statements that he made about fascism in the 1970s. There's also a famous stitch-up, a picture of him at Victoria Station in London, giving the Roman salute. He was simply waving. As Gary Newman pointed out, in the course of a wave, if you take a picture at a certain point, you will get the Roman salute. James Delling-Pole writes, the entire cultural establishment has surrendered to the radical left. I think the entire cultural establishment surrounded to the radical left a long time ago. What we're seeing now is just the end of one phase. Your culture is gone, but we will let you have statues and blue plaques. Now you may no longer have statues and blue plaques, and we, the left, still control the culture. Perhaps it's a good thing that these statues come down, because clearly the world we live in today is a world not fit for heroes or for men and women of genuine accomplishment. Also from Breitbart, law professor Jonathan Turley condemns Cornell professors for shutting down BLM criticism. George Washington University professor Jonathan Turley criticized his colleagues in a blog post last week for shaming those that have voiced criticisms of the Black Lives Matter movement. A group of professors at Cornell Law School shamed Professor William Jacobson last week over a series of Black Lives Matter criticisms that appeared on his legal blog, Legal Insurrection. According to a blog post published by Turley last week, law school professors around the nation are chastising colleagues that have decided to voice criticisms of the Black Lives Matter movement. Well, okay, these people have tenure, which means that it's very, very difficult indeed to get rid of them. And I suspect that a lot of these professors are likely to say, oh, so you're going to have to buy me out then. What's the package going to be? $500,000, million, $2 million, more? So you're going to give me this money so I don't have to be around these ignorant punks anymore who have no interest in learning and simply use the universities as a platform for their jejune antics? I don't know. Sounds like a pretty sweet deal to me. Peter Hitchens, who was famously heroic for not sitting down, abasing himself in an Oxford protest and not wearing a face diaper. There's a very gloomy column in the Daily Mail the Sunday Mail. Of course, Hitchens has been quite gloomy for quite a long time. He writes, what we now face is regime change. That is why these strange crowds have begun to gather around ancient and forgotten monuments, demanding their removal and destruction. Well, the Cenotaph in London is certainly not a forgotten monument. They do not know what they want or understand what they are destroying, but that no longer matters. They think their moment has come, and they may well be right. That is why the memorial to Winston Churchill and the cenotaph itself were shamelessly boarded up on Thursday night, an act of appeasement if ever there truly was one. That is why police chiefs kneel like conquered slaves to the new gods of woke, and the leaders of the Labour Party do likewise. I've seen it happen before, but only when things were moving in the opposite direction. Then, as the Soviet Empire fell and an evil thing was swept from the world, it was a matter for rejoicing. The bloody mass murder of Vladimir Lenin and his equally gory secret police enforcer Felix Dzerzhinsky were pulled from their pedestals by a people sick of being ruled by their heirs. This time, as ignorant armies seek the final abolition of Britain. Hitchens is the author of a book called The Abolition of Britain, which I highly recommend, is very threatening. I would not like to say where it will end. I cannot claim to have known this would happen, but I will say that I had an instinctive fear of very bad things to come when the country began its mad, wild shutdown in March. And again, I think this is a connection that a lot of us had made. Because, apparently civil liberties gone. Protections gone. Why? Oh, it's an emergency. So then they move on to insurrection. But wait, social distancing, no, it's a different emergency. And it's a righteous emergency. So the rule of law is gone now, and destruction of property. Property's not important. Who cares about property? I've learned over the years to trust my instincts, to take that train, to make that phone call, to turn that corner. When I heeded them, I have either benefited or been saved from bad things. When I have ignored them, I have been hurt. It may be inherited from our forebears or learned by decades of experience. It may be a mixture of the two. But on crucial occasions, we know more than we think we do. And as the cities began to darken and empty, and the world as we knew it started to close, I fear that we should never again see the lights lit again as they had been before. It was like the start of a great war without limit, made more perplexing because there was no obvious end to it, ever. This was not just about a disease and a wholly overdone response to it. It was like the death of Princess Diana and the fall of the Twin Towers gathered together in a single great mass of unreason and panic. The Diana episode had been a dictatorship of grief, in which even the most revered parts of the establishment had bowed to the mob. "Show us you care," shouted the headlines, and woe betide those who did not. There's a documentary about Peter Hitchens' late brother Christopher Hitchens, in which he's seen sitting on a bench in London during the Diana hysteria of 1997, where he's making some critical comments about the cult of Diana. And someone comes up to him and starts remonstrating him. "How dare you? You're people's princess. You got to pay respect to people's princess," etc., etc. And Christopher Hitchens said quite rightly and rather bravely that he was an Englishman, and Englishmen have certain rights, and he's not going to pay tribute to this idiotic cult. Hitchens, Peter, that is, continues, "Now we have the dictatorship of fear. It is not the largely fictional R number which governs the behavior of our feeble government, which is only just beginning to grasp how much damage it has done and how hard it will be to repair. It is the F number, the number of people scared into pathetic timidity by the slick but false claim we were all at risk from a terrible and devastating disease. The numbers of dead are grossly inflated by an incredibly lax recording system which does not distinguish between those who died of COVID-19 and those who died of other things but may have been infected by it. The sad but unavoidable fact that the disease is of little danger to most young and healthy people, but is especially deadly to the old and ill, is now also beyond dispute. Thanks to the barefaced dishonesty and unlawful bias of the BBC and also the pitifully bad coverage of several newspapers, millions are unaware that the whole basis of government policy is now completely exploded by scientific experts. Even the truth about Sweden, which did not shut down, is obscured by incessant hostile reporting. The ceaseless assumption of the government and the BBC that the shutdown protected the National Health Service is simply not borne out by any facts. The NHS was never going to be overwhelmed. COVID deaths in this country peaked on April the 8th, an event far too soon to have been caused by the shutdown announced on March 23rd and begun the following day. In fact, the country with the highest number of deaths per head is Belgium, 843 per million, yet Belgium introduced one of the tightest and most severe shutdowns on the planet. It is as if some establishments, including our own, wanted a crisis and used their control of information to achieve one. And still it continues. As of tomorrow, in a symbolic moment never to be forgotten, users of trains and buses will be compelled to wear muzzles or forbidden to travel, because that's when you want to force people to wear mouth diapers, is when the numbers have gone like this. The second spike is coming. Of course, that's what the elite wants. That's what they're praying for, if they pray. I mentioned this before, but you see a similar attempt with climate change or climate emergency, climate extinction, whatever they're calling it now. And people didn't care. They simply, any people who weren't paid to care didn't care. But okay, you're going to do as we say, or everyone is going to die right now. Now, with the decision to abandon law and order, well, it turns out that racism is actually a deadly disease as well, probably a deadlier disease than COVID-19. And what the public health experts say we must do. Now, Hitchens concludes that the formerly great institutions and forces, the church, parliament, the police, the armed services, much of Fleet Street, the university, submitted to these diktats without so much as a sigh. So did what remained of our great industrial and commercial companies. There was on top of this an increasingly feverish atmosphere. Deprived of normal routines and circles of friendship, many people became strained and suggestible. They were discontented, but not allowed to protest against the thing which was oppressing them, the shutdown, since from almost every quarter they were told it was justified. Almost any spark could have ignited this rich mixture. As it happens, it was the death in Minneapolis, a city most British people will never even see, of George Floyd. And then he talks about Tony Blair being rather timid in his transformation of Britain compared to the disaster which has occurred under useless Boris Johnson. I'm just a little boy, says Boris, as he careens from disaster to disaster. He speaks of revolution in Petrograd in 1917. This time there will be no need to storm the Winter Palace, seize the railway station or the telephone exchange or the barracks. The left are already in control of every lever of power and influence, from the schools, the Tories, and the Tories are too weak to reopen, and the police, the civil service, the courts, and the BBC. It is regime change. Do not worry too much about the statues which are now coming down. They mean surprisingly little. Worry more about the ones they are soon going to be putting up and what they will represent. Perhaps our grandchildren will find the courage to pull them down. Well, yeah, I know things look bad now, but as Hitchens himself said, we think we know more than we do. I remember very well, since I lived through it, the period from, let's say, roughly 1967 to the early 70s, in which a great many prominent Americans on the left and the right believed that the country was close to a Marxist revolution. And that did not happen. Nothing close to it happened. Obviously, conditions are rather different now than they were 50 plus years ago. But there are certain people who are always claiming that Marxist revolution or neo-Marxist revolution is just around the corner, and they don't always succeed. The Telegraph had a story. I guess this is from last month. I was just alerted to it a couple of days ago. These are the health workers who have died from coronavirus. And I'm not going to list the names. It's a long list. These are 75 or 80% non-white people. And what this tells me is that the medical profession and hospitals in Britain, care homes, they're under the control of people who are not white. And since the great majority of people in Britain are still white, this suggests an at best uncomfortable position for people in hospitals and nursing homes. It's kind of curious. These are well-paying jobs that we're talking about, and yet, of course, systemic racism. Apparently, non-white people don't get good jobs in Britain, which is obviously false. So, after 2 weeks in which many millions of people have gone into the streets, not observing the draconian health orders, who's the big villain here? Who is the big scofflaw? Come on. It's easy. It's Donald Trump. Donald Trump. He is spreading the disease himself. From the Associated Press, Steve Peoples today, will Trump's return to campaign trail backfire? Yes. He's looking to improve his political standing after trying to navigate through nationwide civil rights protests, a public health crisis, and related economic devastation that has defined the worst period of his turbulent presidency. Of course, this is all his fault. But, I've been warning him, and I was warning even before he was elected, and this is a general warning, that it is a very risky strategy for politicians to take credit for good economic news. And this was not done in politics until Harold Macmillan did it in the 1959 election with his famous or infamous slogan, "You never had it so good." This shocked a great many people because it was as if Prime Minister Macmillan was saying, "I did this." And of course, that is a gross exaggeration or simply fatuous. But if you take the credit, you have to take the blame. Saturday's rally, the AP explains, in Oklahoma will no doubt turn out thousands of adoring supporters in a deep red state, but it remains to be seen how he will address his weakness with independents, suburban women, and people of color who will play a critical role come November. I keep having to explain this to people like this fellow from the AP. Everyone's vote counts exactly the same. How you win elections is getting more votes than the other guy. And it doesn't matter where your votes come from. I know the Associated Press probably thinks that flyover people, that they should not get a whole vote. Maybe it should be, like a percentage, like back in slavery days, but it's a 1-to-1 ratio right now. Lest there be any questions about the risk, the invitation to Trump's first rally since the pandemic began, and the pandemic in Oklahoma at the end of the week includes a waiver absolving the campaign of any responsibility should attendees get sick. This was the memo that has gone out in the last day. And, make no doubt about it. These people are told what to say. Tulsa World editorial, this is the wrong time, and Tulsa is the wrong place for the Trump rally. Yes, just Oklahoma, absolutely devastated by COVID-19. Actually, it has not been devastated by COVID-19. Not even close. 7,848 infections. Yeah, how about that? In the state of Oklahoma. This is from The Hill. Tulsa Health Department Director, I wish we could postpone Trump rally. You wish that you had the right to override the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. They're not bothering to hide it anymore. COVID is here in 19, said Bruce Dart, a Tulsa City County Health Department Director. It is transmitting very efficiently. I wish we could postpone this to a time when the virus isn't as large a concern as it is today. Oh, is that what? Is that what it is? It's a concern? Well, how about some, numbers? 359 deaths in the state of Oklahoma. Now let's, put this into context. And we've been told constantly that context is everything. So 359 deaths. And how many people live in the great state of Oklahoma? 4 million. 4 million people. And they've had 359 deaths. Yeah, I could just see how, devastating that would be. And some clown called Joel Mathis in The Week has an op-ed called Trump the Super Spreader. Now, if he had had a headline that said BLM, the Super Spreader, he wouldn't be contributing to The Week anymore. He wouldn't be contributing to any publication anymore. His address would be published. He would be, shouted down, harassed at home. But no, it's Trump who's the super spreader. Before I get to some bad news, here is, I don't know, is this bad news? From the Wall Street Journal. NBA players on restart plan, not so fast. The pandemic, the shutdown, and the protests that have shaken the country are colliding in the NBA. From Ben Cohen yesterday. The NBA's plan to restart the season is one of the most ambitious experiments in sports. But as players get ready to move into Disney World hotels for months of games and empty arenas, they have begun to ask themselves, do we really want to do this? Their dissent burst into the open last week when some players said they would be willing to take a stand and sit out the season. Their concerns, which include hesitance about spending months in a restricted environment and reluctance about distracting from the Black Lives Matter movement. Yeah, I think that until Black Lives Matter controls every institution in America, the NBA should not return. I know it's a tragedy. I know it's a tragedy that 7-foot-tall men aren't going to be paid millions of dollars in salary and millions of dollars to endorse shoes and the like. But we have to keep our eyes on the prize, as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King instructed us. Black lives matter. And they are perhaps the only things that matter. It must be strange being James Howard, Jim Kunstler right now, because, he is a doom-monger, if you will. And he's been predicting economic devastation for quite some time. And he's been laughed at for many, many years because of this. He's talked about the instability of American economy, its exposure to scale and the like, overextended. And it all seems to be coming true. But I'm just going to read what he has to say this morning about the Democratic Party. He talks of the ever seditious opposition to Trump and the Democratic Party, from the Democratic Party and its resistance allies. Race war is their latest solution to the woes of a disintegrating economy, which only adds social and cultural collapse to the darkening scene. I'm just going to break in and here say, race war, don't you need two sides for a race war? I was thinking over the weekend, what if they gave a race war and only one side came? Kunstler continues, since much of the resistance leadership is drawn from America's intellectual class, the news media, the campus faculties, the honchos of bureaucracy, the politicized judiciary, and the performing monkeys of Hollywood, they will end up denouncing and eating each other in their zealous competition to bring down the hated Trump by inventing ever-fresh fantasies to justify destroying Western civilization and all the horses it rode in on, namely individual liberty, free inquiry in the pursuit of truth, the rule of and due process of law, and the consent of the governed. Never in U.S. history has there been a faction as dishonest as today's Democratic Party or as habituated to the application of bad faith in political conflict. Their addiction to malicious hoaxes and engineered untruths knows no limits, and naturally so, since they are motivated primarily by the dream of dissolving all boundaries in policy, law, sexual relations, and personal conduct. They've been busy proving the past few weeks that they're against the social contract as a basic proposition, exhorting for an end to law enforcement while inciting street violence, crimes against property, and murder. Many voters are onto them, of course, so the Resistance is also determined to derail the 2020 elections by any means necessary, only starting with ballot fraud, but surely escalating to new, innovative chicanes and disruptions. Their chosen candidate for president, that is, their putative leader, is an obvious empty vessel fronting for sinister forces in the background. They stuffed Joe Biden in a basement 12 weeks ago and have no intention of setting him loose on the landscape where he would reveal his unfitness with every breath he takes and every move he makes. The news media, especially in its bad faith role, pretends not to notice, but its minions are too self-important to realize that there are other ways for citizens to learn what is happening out there. Events are rushing ahead at a pace you can barely follow. Summer begins in another week, and why now would you expect any lessening in civil disorders? A heat wave is upon us here in the crowded eastern U.S. at the end of this week, and that's always an invitation to raucous behavior on the steamy streets. Have Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi appealed to their followers to end their violence? Maybe I missed that. They are hinting at a return to COVID-19 lockdown conditions, but you can forget about anyone following that when the temperature tops 90 degrees, and certainly the Democratic leadership knows that. The devastation of small business, careers, livelihoods, households, and futures continues. Take measures to protect your own future as far as possible. Put your energy into imagining how you can be helpful to other people and perhaps incidentally earn their trust and their assistance in mutually beneficial ways. Think about finding a plausible place to live where the rule of law perseveres. Think about how you might fit into an economy run at a smaller scale. Start taking action on that thinking. There's potential for a lot of people to get hurt in the disorders to come. There's plenty you can do to not be one of them. Now, as mentioned earlier, I've seen TV for the first time in 3.5 years over the last, 4 days? And FX has broadcast in binge watch style all of the episodes of the FX series, The People versus OJ Simpson American Crime Story. I watched it when it came out. I thought it was quite good. And I watched it again. And again, I thought it was quite good. I'll just say off the top, Cuba Gooding Jr. is badly cast as OJ Simpson for lots of reasons. OJ Simpson is not all that much taller than Cuba Gooding Jr., although, stars tend to cheat when their height is published. But he seems a lot taller. Also, OJ Simpson is a handsome man, and Cuba Gooding Jr. is not. OJ Simpson has a winning, disarming smile, and Cuba Gooding Jr. does not. Cuba Gooding Jr. In this series is playing pretty much the same character that he, also a football player, in Jerry Maguire. He is alternatively, whiny and making threats, self-pitying, and the like. But I was particularly struck by a courtroom scene. Christopher Darden was one of the two co-prosecutors, along with Marcia Clark, and this bungling duo. Again, it's brought home. It's just how one would expect a certain level of competence in a prosecutorial staff as big and as storied as Los Angeles, but no. These two were absolute clowns who made mistake after mistake, but we can't forget Gil Garcetti, who was the district attorney, who made the brave decision to move the trial from Santa Monica, where it should have been held because that's where the murder was committed, to downtown Los Angeles. And as is well known, and he admitted, he did this because he did not want to see O.J. Simpson convicted by an all-white jury, despite the fact that O.J. Simpson surrounded himself almost exclusively with white people. But there's a scene between Sterling K. Brown as Christopher Darden, and Courtney B. Vance, who was absolutely outstanding as Johnny Cochran. And it has to do with these tapes, transcripts of tapes, which were made of Mark Fuhrman, who was one of the investigating policemen. And a screenwriter was looking for ideas for a screenplay. And the question was, let's talk about bad cops. What would bad cops do? And so Fuhrman was happy to oblige. And he said many objectionable things, but particularly the N-word was used. Christopher Darden argued that this should not be allowed. The jury should not be allowed to see it because basically they would lose their rag. That it would just become a racial thing because the N-word is that powerful. I mean, it's a taboo. It's like the Tetragrammaton. And so Johnny Cochran is just as cynical as, one could imagine. And I have to say this about Johnny Cochran. He was a bullshitter, but he was also real. And that is a powerful combination. He was not, unlike Christopher Darden, not racked by any guilt about being black. Johnny Cochran was perfectly secure about his place in the world. He was a winner, and Christopher Darden is a loser. But Johnny Cochran responds that this is an outrageous calumny on black people to suggest that them hearing the N-word so discombobulates them that they are helpless against various passions. What we are being told 25 years later is that is exactly the case. That I suppose Christopher Darden has been vindicated. That this word, which they use dozens or hundreds of times a day, but we are not allowed to use, has the power to raise the earth. That's how powerful it is, and that's what we're all supposed to believe. And again, I thought this was absolutely fascinating because Darden was right and Cochran was wrong, but Cochran was arguing falsely because he knew the power of this word and he intended to make it even more powerful. Christopher Darden says in this drama that OJ Simpson was the first person in history to get off because he was black. And when you see the jurors arguing amongst themselves, I mean, what we're looking at in the OJ case is jury nullification, essentially. The idea that there was a conspiracy by corrupt cops is so absolutely absurd. The number of things that they would have needed to do in short order and the amount of luck that they would have had to find, all these various people's blood. It's simply absurd, but this sort of argument cuts no ice with the type of people who were on the jury. And jury of peers, yes, it was a jury of peers, and I suppose you could say that there's a representative of black people in the United States generally, that a powerful, rich, successful black man was being brought down by the white man. Not for the first time and not for the last time. Again, it could be pointed out and was pointed out that OJ Simpson didn't seem to have very much time for black people. He dumped his first wife and married a 18-year-old blonde woman. And most of his friends were black or white. He liked to hang around with white people. None of that made any difference. It was a very simple narrative. White people taking down a black man. And I think of this term white privilege, which is, I don't believe, used in the series. But again, I saw it reflected in this series because you believe in this conspiracy, then you believe that white people have superpowers, that they have supernatural powers, that the laws of physics, the laws of time, are as nothing to white people. That's just how powerful and wicked that they are. And an enormous number of Black people in the United States believe this. And increasingly, an enormous number of white people in the United States are believing it, or say they believe it. Of course, they might ask themselves the question, if white people, all white people, have white privilege, have these superpowers, where's my share? How come I'm not, wetting my beak? That this was a political judgment, the verdict of the trial. And Johnny Cochran was appealing as much as to the public as he was to the jury, because he knew that public opinion was going to get back to the jury in various ways. And I think that the OJ Simpson trial and the verdict, it was a turning point. And we've all seen the footage. We've all seen the split screen with Black people just the happiest imaginable when they hear the verdict, literally jumping for joy, and the white people stricken and unbelieving. And I think that the OJ Simpson verdict, it predicted America's future. Oh, one other thing, one last thing, which I found hilariously funny and is actually true. This series is based on Jeffrey Toobin's book on the case. I do not like Jeffrey Toobin, but he wrote a fine book about this, which I recommend. That the jurors had been sequestered. They were sequestered for over a year and a half, something like that. And they're obviously suffering from cabin fever, but they get taken out in various expeditions, for instance, to buy clothing and other things. And a Black juror wants to be removed from the jury. Why? Because of the discrimination of the sheriffs who are looking after them. Can you describe this discrimination? Asks Judge Ito. The white people get an hour. We get taken for an hour to Target, but only half an hour to Ross. And? Well, everyone knows that white people like Target and Black people like Ross. So this is discrimination. I just thought that sort of comment, and the fact that it was taken seriously and acted upon, it reveals a broken society. I feel vindicated. Not about OJ, well, perhaps, but in my championing of physical media. You might want to get your physical media while you can. Again, from Breitbart, Gone with the Wind returning to HBO Max with historical context introduction from Professor Jacqueline Stewart. She's described here as a scholar and university professor. I don't know who this woman is. I know that Whoopi Goldberg made a pretty penny from Disney when they brought out cartoons from the 20s and 30s, which of course they put back in the vault, as Disney does. And so there are some problematic cartoons there. And so they get Whoopi Goldberg. They paid her, a Black woman, to provide context. For the record, the idea that anyone could form negative opinions about Black people from watching Disney or Warner Brothers or MGM cartoons or any of these cartoons from the 30s and the 40s, I just find absolutely absurd. Anyway, Professor Stewart, she's at the University of Chicago, where she's professor of cinema studies and director of the nonprofit arts organization Black Cinema House. She has published on the history of African Americans in the production of film, including Migrating to the Movies, Cinema and Black Urban Modernity. She co-authored LA Rebellion, Creating a New Black Cinema, and with Charles Musser co-curated the DVD set Pioneers of African American Cinema. As John Darvisher would say, blackety black, black. So, I don't know. Gone with the Wind apparently has been spared. I guess you're going to have to listen to some Black woman hectoring you for 5 or 10 minutes before you get to watch it. You can still buy the Blu-ray, though, for the time being. What else do we have? Oh, Oscar-winning screenwriter John Ridley discusses Tarantino's use of the N-word. The Oscar-winning screenwriter who led the calls for Gone with the Wind to be removed from a streaming service, has criticized Quentin Tarantino for his painful and infuriating use of the N-word. Yeah, so now he wants to take down Tarantino. Let's see, amid the renewed debate on race and culture, what, there's a debate? Really? There has to be two sides for a debate. The acclaimed filmmaker, who is white, has been criticized in the past for the liberal use of racial epithets in his movie. Novelist and screenwriter Ridley told the PA news agency that Tarantino in some ways luxuriates in the word, not like black people don't luxuriate in that word at all, and adding it's not used in particular context. It's just used to be used, like all those black people who put it at the end of every sentence. But that's different. Of course it's different. Oh, John Cleese has shamed the BBC into reinstating ousted Fawlty Towers episode, which was removed because of the presence of racial slurs. The episode called The Germans, which famously coined the phrase "Don't mention the war," was removed due to the service reappraising its catalogue in light of the international Black Lives Matter movement. While UK TV declined to list the specific issues it had with the episode, it's assumed that the removal was due to one scene featuring a character, the Major, saying the N-word several times. The BBC is now run by a mixture of marketing people and petty bureaucrats, Cleese wrote on social media on June 12th. So BBC decisions are made by persons whose main concern is not losing their jobs. That's why they're so cowardly and gutless and contemptible. Well, I can say that I don't think that John Cleese has kept up. I mentioned Preston Sturges movie from 1941 last week, in which there is a comical cook. And this is absolutely outrageous. How dare they? Again, I'll point out that every single character in this movie is mocked relentlessly, but you can't have a little fun with a black cook in a moving vehicle trying to keep everything from, landing on the floor and his face gets white with flour and all that sort of thing. Can't have that anymore. And I'm sure there's a fair number of people, but particularly people under the age of 30 or perhaps 40, who are going to hear this word in Fawlty Towers and they're going to get the vapors, because that's what we're talking about. Victorian hysteria has now returned woke style. Again, my advice to you is get a hold of the physical media while you still can. A Rolling Stone writer says Law and Order should be canceled because of its positive portrayal of cops, as Amazon considers removing the Dukes of Hazzard because of its use of Confederate flags. Rolling Stone writer E.J. Dixon writes that the last remaining Law and Order program should be canceled because of Olivia Benson's model police character. Mariska Hargitay, 52, has played the part of Captain Benson on Special Victims Unit for 21 years on the NBC network. That show is particularly repellent to me because it luxuriates, if you will, in the sexual degradation of women and some men. It is particularly a callous and cynical show. Oh, let's see this. Bill de Blasio, mayor of New York, welds parks shut in Jewish neighborhoods, protects Black Lives Matter protests. One gets the impression that the mayor really doesn't like black people. He doesn't like Jewish people. I wonder where he could have got that influence from. I wonder. Joel Fisher tweeted, yes, this is actually happening now. Bill de Blasio was welding the gates at the biggest park in the Jewish community, Borough Park, Brooklyn, so your child shouldn't try to break in, while hundreds of thousands of people gathered yesterday at Brooklyn Museum for a BLM protest. Meanwhile, again, according to Breitbart, New York City coronavirus contact tracers won't ask about protest attendance because, being in close proximity to hundreds of thousands of people, not relevant. This is from MedPage Today. Nursing homes shocked at insanely wrong CMS data on COVID-19. When the administrator of the Saugus Rehab and Nursing Center in Saugus, Massachusetts, heard that a new Medicare website reported her facility had 794 confirmed cases of COVID-19, the second highest in the country, and 281 cases among staff, she gasped. "Oh my God, where are they getting those numbers from?" said Josephine Ajayi. "That doesn't make any sense. Those weren't the numbers that our facility reported to the CDC's National Healthcare Safety Network under new rules from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services." Ajayi said her 80-bed facility actually reported 45 residents have tested positive and 5 residents died. About 19 staff members tested positive for the virus. And I've been talking about juicing the numbers for months, and I've been accused of being a conspiracy theorist. Well, I believe I have been triumphantly vindicated. For example, the Southern Point Living Center in Colbert, Oklahoma, with 95 beds, was reported to have had 339 residents die of COVID-19, yet no confirmed or suspected cases. "We have not lost anyone, nor have we had a COVID-19 case in the building," said a woman identifying herself as an assistant at Southern Point, but who declined to give her full name. The day after CMS released the data on Friday, she said someone from the CDC called the facility to ask if their numbers were correct as reported, and we told them no. Now, COVID-19, enormous threat to my own province of British Columbia, so we were told. An existential threat. So the whole province has to be shut down, although I will say, in defense of NDP Premier John Horgan, that the insanity in British Columbia was less pronounced than the insanity in other Canadian provinces, and particularly in nut houses like New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So how many people have died in British Columbia, which is a population of 5.1 million? 368 people have died. It turns out, as revealed by the Vancouver Sun a couple of days ago, in May 2020, 170 people died from overdoses in British Columbia. Okay, so 168 people since the beginning of the COVID-19 epidemic are dead. 170 fatal drug overdoses in British Columbia in 1 month. How about that? Daphne Brahm writes, "May was the deadliest month in BC history for illicit drug overdoses, a toll exacerbated by the very provisions that were helping getting the COVID-19 pandemic under control." You see, the excuse that they've come up with this is that, you see, people weren't getting the services that they needed, instead of the obvious explanation that there were a whole bunch of people without jobs with an enormous amount of time on their hands being told that life was pointless, that there was normal was gone. And so the fact that people start taking a lot of fentanyl, which is what's killing most of these people, it makes sense. It makes sense. Supplies of fentanyl, the epidemic's major killer, have decreased, but its toxicity of what little there is has increased exponentially. The BC coroner described the concentrations found in the May post-mortem toxicology tests as extreme. Canada is not immune to the Black Lives Matter craze. The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, wants to move very quickly on anti-racism initiatives. The Treasury Board President, Jean-Yves Duclos, says why the Treasury Board President would be pronouncing on this is an interesting case. Now, all of these stories about the alleged systemic discrimination against Blacks and other minorities in Canada, none of them, not a single one of them, mentions the fact that it is white people who are discriminated in Canada against officially, because we have affirmative action. And this is written into our Constitution, so it cannot be challenged. Section 15(2). Nope, never mentioned that. That's an inconvenient fact. The commissioner of the RCMP, Brenda Lucky, was asked whether she believed there was systematic discrimination in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and she said she did not believe that was the case. Well, you can imagine what happened next. And she said, I did acknowledge that we, like others, have racism in our organization, but I did not say definitively that systemic racism exists in the RCMP. I should have. So, okay, we're asking for your honest opinion. And she gives her honest opinion. No, we don't want your honest opinion. Bend the knee, copper. So what's the latest on this? Senator calls for RCMP boss to quit, saying she doesn't understand racism. Rex Murphy is a famous commentator in my country, on radio, television, and in print. In fact, I was interviewed a couple of times by Rex Murphy quite a few years ago, and I was quite impressed by him because I said some things which were controversial at the time. I think I was talking about the Reform Party, and the line was that everyone in the Reform Party is, well, like, is a Trump supporter, is a troglodyte, bigot, idiot, incestuous relationships with sisters or cousins, whatever, that sort of thing. And I said that I disagreed, and that the Reform Party was a populist revolt. And I know, because he told me, that Rex Murphy was impressed by what I had to say. He wrote a piece in the National Post, which is Canada's far-right newspaper, and this appeared on June the 1st, saying, Canada is not a racist country, despite what the Liberals say, and there was a takedown. There have been several takedown attempts against Rex Murphy. And the Craven National Post leadership now has some context for this column at the very top for the column itself. This column by Rex Murphy provoked a strong reaction from readers. Upon review, it was determined there was a failure in the normal editing oversight that columns should be subjected to. This issue has been identified and policies changed to prevent a repeat. We apologize for the failure. Please see these articles that offered a different perspective. And there is an article here from a woman whose name is Vanmala Subramaniam. Was that a Tamil name? That would be my guess. And yeah, Canada, terrible, 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 terrible country. Again, my question is, why did you come here, or why did your family come here? Huh? If it's so terrible. You didn't know about Canada? You didn't know that it was a majority white country? I think they did. I think they did. And I think that was one of the things that attracted them. Okay. But here is the topper. I looked this woman up on Twitter. She's a mostly business reporter at the Financial Post with the occasional angry column, formerly of Vice. Yeah, the Antifa News Network and the CBC. There's an avatar here, and she has a caste mark. I am not accepting political advice or racial advice or advice on equity from a woman literally wearing a caste mark. And no Canadians should either. I mean, I would say that this was a troll, but these people, they have no sense of self-awareness. They literally do not. You've heard that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Well, especially hell hath no fury like a high caste Indian woman scorned, as Canadians are finding out to their detriment. Okay, so a final look at the chat. Super Predator says, Trump to lecture us about white privilege in 3, 2, 1. We'll just have to wait till tomorrow. Alex Delarge says, sorry, I'm not capable of the mental gymnastics practiced by MAGA folks. Soviets were soldiers. I think they were, well, okay. I don't get that. Okay, let's go to the bottom here, see what we got. Brandon Smith says 20 years ago, my Canadian dad was told to make a second test for minority job applicants that they were able to pass. Brandon Smith and government hiring practices pushing intersectionality. Well, no, we keep hearing about the numbers need to be brought up in the civil service. Well, they already have affirmative action. You know, they're looking for pretty much any minority with a pulse. That's how desperate they are to do this. The RCMP many years ago was found to be placing advertisements saying no white males need apply. This happens quite a bit in my country. La Comte says Canada only reacts to this madness, never had the reasonable motivation choice. KMG. Oh, Michael Moriarty was too good for that show. Presumably Law and Order, says William Hicks. Yeah, I always liked Michael Moriarty. I especially liked this movie, Q, The Winged Serpent. It's very, very funny. And it's got Candy Clark in it. She's a particular favorite of mine. Michael Moriarty plays an ambitious idiot who discovers that Quetzalcoatl, the famed Central American deity, monster, is nesting at the top of the Chrysler building. And he decides that he's going to make a buck off it. YT said yesterday, Cuomo literally read us a lecture and threatened to close everything down again after people were hanging out drinking. He talks to us as if we're kids. Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, you heard about those Hasidim, the young Hasidim, who said that they were doing some sort of George Floyd memorial, and they were just doing like Jewish stuff. I mean, I think that, you know, why not have a George Floyd drinking party? You know, you're going to hoist a few in honor of George Floyd and of Black Lives Matter. Manfred von Tisselbaum says the original Law and Order was pretty good for a while. I don't know. I thought that, you know, you have a girlfriend and there's certain shows that you're forced to watch. Well, this was one of them. I thought the production values were good. I thought the acting was good. I thought the scripts were horrible. And there was many famous cases where they took actual events and inverted them. My favorite was there'd been some, was it rape, murder of a young woman, a college student or whatever. And so we're introduced to a Black conservative who wears Savile Row suits and speaks in a, how shall we say, very distinct form of speaking, form of address. And I thought, it's that guy. He killed. Because he has to. Black conservative, come on. Savile Row suits. You know, this guy's quoting Burke or Tocqueville, and well, anyone who does that must be evil. And so much of Law and Order is like that. The Edmund Perry case, the young fellow from the ghetto who'd been given a big break, led into the Tony private school, and was accused of killing a cop. A liberal journalist wrote a whole book about this, how shocked he was when he found out that this ridiculous allegation that Edmund Perry had killed a cop turned out to be true. Well, Law and Order did it, and they did it backwards. They did it exactly backwards. Law and Order's twists were all too predictable, said Octopus Knight. And in fact, this has been mocked. The twist ending has been mocked on both Robot Chicken and Community. Presumably, it has been mocked many other places as well. That is it for today's show, and it is great to be back. I'll see what I can do about the lighting during the week. I'm still, you know, you move into a place and you find out that you need all of these things which you don't have. And in many cases, you have to rush out to get them. But it is great to be back to talk to you all again. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And once again, it is a regular programming week. So we're going to have Theater Thursday with Fassbinder's Maria Brown. And on Friday, Philip K. Dick's Men in High Castle is going to be on the book club. If you'd like to show any part of it, I'd greatly appreciate it if you would hit the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not. if you would like to support the program, and I would very much appreciate it, especially considering the circumstances that I'm in that I've just described. My PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. I will leave you with my now traditional benediction and farewell. In these days of social atomization and the collapse of civilization, I do dearly hope that all of my dear listeners and viewers manage to find some human companionship in order to ease the burden. Good night, all.